Again, this is exactly why Congress needs whistleblowers to conduct oversight and course correct these abusive federal agencies.
And this idea has been foundational to the understanding of the American Republic. But what does it mean to be a nation of laws? And is it still true in America in the era of Donald Trump?
Sadly, what we will see from the Democrats today will not be a focus on the substance of what these brave men have exposed.
Are we a nation of laws, one characterized by a legal code that applies equally to all citizens, a justice system in which no one is above the law or beyond its reach?
Adam Schiff gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, as Congresswoman Harriet Hageman stood and uttered 5 devastating words. "You lied, Mr. Schiff." The chamber fell silent. 4 years of Russia collusion claims were about to be exposed one by one. What followed was a systematic takedown so complete that former allies wouldn't make eye contact with Schiff afterward. Hageman didn't just challenge his statements. She revealed how he continued pushing claims, knowing full well they had been debunked. The consequences were immediate. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. For years, Adam Schiff positioned himself as the man who had the goods on Donald Trump. The California representative built his national reputation on one explosive claim, that he possessed more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. But when Congresswoman Harriet Hageman stepped up to the podium during the recent hearing, that carefully crafted narrative began crumbling faster than a house of cards.
An extremist at the top of their lungs. They will pound the tables. They will continue to gaslight us about Russia, Russia, Russia.
In which there is not one law for the rich and powerful and yet another for everyone else? Or have we become a nation of men?
Because that's all that Adam Schiff knows what to say. But make no mistake, they are simply trying to cover up the unforgivable.
In which the law must bend to the will of its most powerful citizens, a society in which wealth and privilege mean that the law need not apply to them.
The chamber fell silent as Hageman methodically laid out her case. With the precision of a prosecutor, she displayed video clips of Schiff's most bombastic media appearances. In one particularly damning segment from March 2017, Schiff looked directly into MSNBC's cameras and declared with absolute certainty that evidence of collusion existed. The footage played on large screens throughout the chamber, forcing Schiff to watch his own words come back to haunt him. The American people were promised a smoking gun, Hageman stated, her voice cutting through the tension. Representative Schiff stood before news cameras week after week, month after month, promising that collusion was hiding in plain sight. He claimed he had seen evidence that would expose everything. As Hageman continued her methodical dismantling, she pulled out a copy of the Mueller report itself. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. After 2 years, 2,800 subpoenas, nearly 500 search warrants, and interviews with approximately 500 witnesses, Mueller's investigation reached a conclusion that stood in direct opposition to everything Schiff had been claiming. Hageman read directly from the report, her voice growing stronger with each word. The gallery grew uncomfortably quiet as the contradiction hung in the air. But Hageman was just warming up. She displayed a timeline showing Schiff's CNN appearances where he confidently promised to expose Trump and reveal evidence that would be damning. Next to each appearance date, she noted his position on the House Intelligence Committee, highlighting that he had been receiving classified intelligence briefings throughout this period. This wasn't just a politician speculating, Hageman pointed out. This was the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee with access to our nation's most sensitive secrets, making definitive claims about evidence. The most powerful moment came when Hageman paused, looked directly at Schiff, and asked the question that had been building throughout her presentation. Where was the proof, Mr. Schiff? The silence that followed was deafening. What made Hageman's questioning so devastating wasn't just the contradiction she exposed, but the broader implications. If Schiff had seen actual evidence, as he repeatedly claimed, then why didn't Mueller find it? And if such evidence didn't exist, then what exactly was Schiff referring to in all those television appearances? The tension in the room reached its peak as Hageman delivered her final assessment. "You misled the public," she stated firmly, each word landing like a hammer blow. "You fed them a lie. You convinced them something was there when you knew it wasn't." The cameras caught what happened next, a moment that told the whole story without without a single word being spoken. Schiff's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk, his face frozen in what could only be described as forced composure. The man who had once dominated news cycles with confident accusations now sat silent, unable to counter the evidence of his own statements. Several Democratic colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One even appeared to be reviewing notes with sudden intense interest, anything to avoid making eye contact with their embattled colleague. For a man who had been the party's star prosecutor during the impeachment hearings, this public unraveling marked an extraordinary reversal of fortune. What makes this confrontation so remarkable is how it exposed the gap between public accusations and proven facts. For years, millions of Americans formed their understanding of the Trump presidency through Schiff's statements. Major publications wrote headlines based on his assurances. News anchors introduced him as the man who had seen the evidence. Yet when that evidence was finally demanded in the cold light of congressional oversight, none materialized. Those major publications and news anchors who amplified Schiff's claims weren't just passive messengers. They were active participants in what Hageman was about to expose as a full-blown system of deception. When she uttered the words, "The truth was never the goal," you could practically feel the oxygen being sucked out of the room. Hageman wasn't finished with just putting Schiff in the hot seat. Her gaze shifted to the media ecosystem that had given him a platform for years. CNN and MSNBC found themselves squarely in her crosshairs as she methodically laid out how these networks had provided Schiff with essentially unlimited airtime to spread his narrative without ever demanding the one thing that actually mattered: proof. These weren't just interviews, Hageman pointed out, her voice steady but cutting. These were endorsements. These were platforms where his word was treated as gospel. The Congresswoman's argument was simple but devastating. By presenting Schiff's allegations as established fact rather than unproven claims, major networks had effectively transformed themselves from journalists into amplifiers. What made Hageman's takedown so powerful was how she connected the dots between Schiff's statements and the media's unwillingness to challenge them. Time after time, she noted, Schiff would appear on primetime shows making explosive allegations, and not once did these supposedly hard-hitting journalists ask the most basic question: where's your evidence? The tension in the hearing room became palpable as Hageman continued her dissection of this symbiotic relationship. She wasn't just talking about a few misleading news segments. She was describing a years-long pattern where certain networks had effectively outsourced their credibility to Schiff, allowing him to make claim after claim without substantiation. When the Mueller report finally came out and contradicted virtually everything Mr. Schiff had been saying, Hageman noted, where were the corrections? Where were the retractions? Where were the apologies to the American people for getting it so wrong for so long? Her questions hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence. But Hageman was building towards something bigger than just criticizing media bias. As she spoke, it became clear she was making a more profound point about institutional corruption and the erosion of trust. This wasn't just about politics. It was about a system designed to protect certain narratives regardless of their truthfulness. The room grew completely still when Hageman delivered what might be the most damning line of her entire presentation. The truth was never the goal. The goal was control. You could see the impact ripple across the chamber, with several committee members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Hageman went on to explain how this coordinated effort between certain politicians and media outlets had profound consequences beyond just partisan politics. Millions of Americans, she argued, had lost faith in their institutions, not because they were told to, but because they witnessed with their own eyes how these institutions seemed more committed to narratives than to facts. When people are told for years that evidence exists, that certainty exists, that wrongdoing definitely occurred, and then they discover it was all smoke and mirrors, what happens to their trust? Hageman asked. It doesn't just disappear for one network or one congressman, it erodes across the board. As her presentation reached its climax, Hageman delivered an assessment that seemed to crystallize the entire hearing. This is what corruption looks like. It's not just one man lying, it's a system built to protect the lie. The words landed with stunning force in the chamber. What happened next was perhaps even more telling than Hageman's words themselves. As cameras panned across the press gallery, journalists who would normally be frantically taking notes sat in uncomfortable silence. Several couldn't seem to make eye contact with anyone in the room. One reporter appeared to be studying his notepad with sudden intense interest. The journalist's uncomfortable silence suddenly made perfect sense when Hageman laid bare the financial toll of Schiff's Russia narrative. The staggering price tag, a whopping $32 million in taxpayer money. money. This wasn't just about political theater anymore. This was about real dollars that could have changed American lives. As Hageman revealed this figure, you could almost feel the mood in Congress shift from political sparring to genuine outrage. $32 million, Hageman emphasized, letting the number hang in the air. That's what American taxpayers paid for an investigation largely built on Representative Schiff's baseless claims. The chamber grew quieter as the magnitude of this waste sank in. Hageman wasn't just throwing numbers around, she was painting a picture of squandered opportunity. She spelled it out in terms everyone could understand. Think about what that money could have done for our schools, she said, her voice rising with each example, or for our veterans who desperately need better care, or for securing our borders. Each alternative use of the funds landed like a body blow to Schiff's credibility. This wasn't abstract political maneuvering anymore. These were real resources that could have addressed pressing national needs. But Hageman was just warming up. What happened after the Mueller report came out, she explained, was perhaps even more damning than the wasted millions. When the truth finally emerged, no collusion, no conspiracy, did Representative Schiff acknowledge his role in this colossal waste? She paused for effect. Instead, he doubled down. The Congresswoman detailed how Schiff, rather than expressing regret or offering an explanation for his disproven claims, pushed instead for more investigation. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, Hageman argued. It was deliberate deception that continued even after the facts were established. Representative Schiff continued spreading the same falsehoods, knowing full well they had already been debunked, she declared, her words cutting through the tension in the chamber. The cameras caught several Democratic representatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't partisan theater anymore. This was about integrity, about the sacred trust between elected officials and the people they serve. Hageman connected these financial and ethical breaches to something even more valuable than money: public trust. When we mislead the American people at this scale, we damage the very foundation of our democracy, she said. Every time a public official knowingly spreads falsehoods, it chips away at citizens' faith in all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike. The atmosphere in the chamber grew increasingly tense as Hageman built her case. This wasn't just about one congressman's misstatements. It was about a pattern of behavior that had real consequences for how Americans view their government. Trust in institutions, once lost, is nearly impossible to rebuild, and Hageman argued that Schiff had played a central role in that erosion. As she finished her meticulous presentation, something remarkable happened. The cameras panned across the Democratic side of the chamber, capturing a scene that spoke volumes. Several of Schiff's Democratic colleagues, people who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him through years of investigations, couldn't seem to make eye contact with him. Some stared down at papers on their desks. Others whispered to adjacent colleagues. The isolation was palpable. The censure vote that followed revealed further cracks in what had once been a unified front. While some Democrats remained loyal, standing firmly with their embattled colleague, others hesitated. The typical solidarity was fracturing before everyone's eyes. When the final tally was announced, applause erupted from the Republican side, while many Democrats sat motionless, as if unsure how to respond to this public rebuke of a man who had once been their standard bearer. The fall of Adam Schiff reached its climax in a moment that will go down in political history. After years of dominating headlines and commanding attention on every major network, Schiff now found himself officially censured by Congress. The vote wasn't just a rebuke, it was a complete public humiliation for the man who once seemed untouchable. As the final tally was announced, cameras captured a defeated Schiff, his expression frozen in disbelief. The tables had turned so dramatically that when confronted by reporters in the hallway afterward, the once talkative congressman had nothing to say. His silence spoke volume, but Harriet Hageman made it crystal clear. This wasn't just about holding one man accountable. This is about accountability, and we will not stop until it is served, she declared with unmistakable conviction. The message to Washington was impossible to miss. The days of unchallenged deception were over. A new era had begun, and no one, regardless of their political connections, would be immune from facing the consequences of their actions.